Imagine this. You're 22 years old, you just graduated college, and you landed a fire job. You got to move across the country for it, and you're just ready to get the wheels going. You're broke, you got your whole life packed in your car, but you got the opportunity of a lifetime waiting for you 2,000 miles away. I'll call this phase the honeymoon phase. And this was the experience that I went through. When I was 22 years old, I was broke as hell. I just graduated college, said goodbye to all my friends and family, packed everything I had into my little hatchback, and drove across the country to go start a new career. Now, I was one of the fortunate ones to land a job right out of college, and I was super excited. I get to a new city, start anew. I knew nobody in this new city, but it gave me the opportunity to not only make money, but also make friends, forget about the past, and like I said, just restart. And what I will say is that the first couple years of my life after this move were actually bliss. I got everything that I wanted and it was everything that I expected. I finally got to make some money, had a little bit of money in my pocket. I wasn't that broke 22-year-old anymore. I made some friends in this new city. I got to explore the new city. My job gave me a lot of opportunities to travel and to experience life outside. And I really got that restart that I was looking for. I moved far away from my hometown and started building a life for me in this new town, and it was great. Now, I think that it's very common and exceedingly normal that, over a certain amount of time, when you've gotten used to things, you've become accustomed to something, it loses its excitement. And that's what happened to me. The city eventually lost excitement, things stopped feeling as new as they once were, and life grew a little calmer, somewhat stale in some aspects, but I don't want to say boring. That being said, as I upskilled at my job, I became more experienced, I started knowing what I was talking about, and I started becoming somewhat important at work. Work itself became more demanding and more stressful, as is the natural progression of things. But as I started giving more of myself to work, became better at my job, started making more and more money over the years, I found myself increasingly unfulfilled and unpassionate. I would go to work, do my 8 to 10 hours, come home, and kind of just sit at home, either stare at my screen or doom scroll on TikTok. And I really found that there were too many processes going on in my life, too much systematic structure, and too little impact at the same time. Now, I don't think that there's a problem with having structure. I think that most humans require some sort of stress or some structure in order to operate. But I think what was really hurting me was the fact that I felt like I had making too little of an impact, not just on the lives around me, but my own. This was not what I wanted to do, and my career and my occupation was not the thing that I wanted to be known for. So for a while, I eventually fell into a state of burnout, and I would call it depression. I wasn't necessarily sad all the time, but I was very numb. I felt like I was dissociating. I felt like my memory was completely shot. I couldn't remember what I ate this morning. I couldn't remember what I did yesterday or the last week. And it just felt like the calendar was ticking and my time was running out. I started off as a 22-year-old, pretty young kid, and over the years I was getting older and older, and I started to feel like I wasn't doing as much with my youth as I wanted to. Glad that I'm able to recognize this now, but those 20 something, 30 something year olds, time is your most valuable asset. Time can do a lot for you. For example, in the stock market, right, they always have that saying where time in the market beats timing the market. And I think to some degree, and for a lot of people, that's true. Not all of us are going to be excellent traders. I think that the large majority of people lose money in the market anyways trying to trade. But for the conservative route, S&P 500 index funds, good old classic combo, well, that usually grows over time and that does people well. That being said, I think that was in a weird crossroad because in my mid 20s, I am not stable enough to quit, stable as in financially stable, but I am too tired to live outside work. I'm giving work my all, I'm grinding, 8 to 10 hours a day. I know that for a lot of people, that's not a lot. Those are a hard 8 to 10 hours. Those are a mentally taxing 8 to 10 hours. And I don't even think that it's the amount of time that I'm putting in the office that's exhausting me. It's really just mental weight of being in the office and doing that kind of stressful work. After a couple years, I wanted to find another job. I was spending probably 6 months to a year interview prepping and sending out application after application after application. And I got a ton of rejections right off the bat. I got cold called. I know for a fact that my resume wasn't even looked at by many of these companies, which is just how the game goes. But I failed a lot of interviews at the same time. Some of them definitely I felt like were my fault. I had much rust on me from not interviewing for a few years, or I just maybe hadn't prepared in the right way. And in the end, the tech market just had other plans for me. I really started doubting my own purpose. I felt like I wasn't making an impact at work, an impact that was meaningful to me. I was doing my job and I was doing it well. I was getting good feedback from managers. And I felt like, in terms of my career, I was growing. I was maturing. I was learning how to run meetings. I was learning how to run design calls. I was learning how to work with customers. My software engineering skills were improving. But through all that, I really felt like, as a person, that didn't mean that much to me. It took some time to really realize that. I had been studying this for my whole life. For the last 6 years, 8 years, this was my life. This was all I knew, and this was my craft. So inherently, it became part of my identity. So what happens when the identity that I spent so long perfecting and building over the years is making me feel unfulfilled? I always try to be grateful because I understand that the current tech market in 2026 is awful. And being able to be employed and having made some money over the last couple of years and have gained that experience under my belt is a blessing. I recognize that. I'm young, I'm healthy, I have a roof over my head, I have money in my pocket. As fundamental and as awesome as it is to have those things, life has a funny way of throwing some sort of problem at you no matter what stage of life that you're currently at. And for a long time, despite having all these positives in my life, I still felt dissociated, depressed, and like I couldn't even think clearly on a day to day basis. Circling back to the interview process, there was one particular interview for a company. I don't want to name names for the sake of anonymity. I don't even know if I said that right. I probably butchered that. I don't want to name names, but I had worked tremendously hard for this interview. It was during the course of a summer, and I had given up probably 3 to 4 months of hardcore interview prep for these interviews. I remember from dusk till dawn on weekends and as much time on weekdays because obviously I still had to work. I was just dedicating to elite code and studying system design, reading textbooks, doing practice problems. That was my life for an entire summer. I never went out. My girlfriend was a huge support for me, but this phase of life took a huge toll on me, and I could feel it mentally. I was burning myself out. This, on top of the feelings I was already feeling from work, were honestly killing me mentally. But I didn't care. I knew that, but I was willing to sacrifice that kind of thing because I was confident in myself that I could land this interview. And to me, landing this job would have been a new leap, a new chapter of my life. It would have allowed me to run away from the feelings of being dissociated and depressed and feeling stale about my current life situation and start anew the same way I did 2 years prior. I had put extreme pressure on myself to succeed, and I would constantly light that flame under my seat, telling myself that if I failed this interview, if I didn't get this job, that I would be stuck. And then what happened? I did 8 rounds of interviews for this company. I got good feedback throughout the process. And at the end, I was literally told that I was just barely not good enough. It wasn't an entry level position. So in my head, I was hearing things like, if I just barely wasn't good enough, why couldn't I have been downgraded one? What did I do wrong? You know? throughout all of those rounds of interviews, I felt like I nailed each one. Some more than others, I could point out some places where I probably could have improved a little bit, but for the most part, I really don't feel like I humanly could have been more perfect than I was. I really expected myself to take that rejection a lot harder. I was so confident in the fact that if I failed that interview, that it would feel like the meanest uppercut straight to my nutsack. Literally, steel toe boot, Timberland pros, right to the ball sack. But when I got that phone call, I remember I was at work and hearing the rejection from recruiter really didn't hurt at all. If anything, it was really freeing. I was relieved more than anything. I was relieved that the torture that I had put myself through the last few months could end. Even if it didn't end in a job, it just ended. And I think that was a huge wake up call to me because it was the fact that I didn't even care whether or not I got that job. It was more about just freeing my mind from the jail that I was putting myself in. After that, I really just took a step back and reevaluated my life. I remember coming into work the next day and I was happy for the first time that summer, for the first time in months. I came to work and I felt happy. I did my job, talked to my office mate, got lunch. I was so glad to come home and not have to open a textbook and not have to torture myself despite how tired I was by burying my nose in some article or some practice problem. Over the next few months following the interview, I sat down and just thought to myself, I didn't touch another textbook. I didn't touch another leak code problem for a while. Some of the things I learned during this period of reflection, and that's really what it was a period of reflection, and I would almost say enlightenment, was that I had really put career too high. But even higher than that, I put my pride and my ego, which I think is where the real problem began. I don't want to say that there's anything wrong with putting your career first, especially when you're young, in your early or mid 20s. There's nothing wrong with that. I had done that for a long time, and I still continue to do that. Career remains very high on my pedestal to this day. But that being said, pride and ego is where it started becoming an issue. I knew I had wanted to say that I had worked at that company and that I had lived in this location more than I wanted to say that I was happy and fulfilled. I wanted bragging rights more than anything. And it kind of takes a man to admit that I was prioritizing something that was detrimental to my mental health. And I'm kind of glad that I failed my objective at the time because I think my objective was made via fogged lens. I don't think that I was thinking clearly or focusing on the right things in life at the time. I thought to myself after the rejection that if I had gotten that job, it would have equivalent of climbing halfway up out of a well only to fall back down. When I first moved out and pursued my first career, the job that I'm at right now, I had those feelings. I was driven by excitement. I was driven by the allure of living in a new city, of starting a new job, meeting new people. And I was basically repeating that cycle. That would have gotten me back into the same position that I'm at now, but just older, where would have even more money in my pocket, even more experience in my belt, but probably just as or even more depressed and lost. That interview was a wake up call for me. That was my reset. And all this hindsight bias, but looking at the company that I failed the interview for now, like I said, I'm not going to name names. I'm even more glad that I didn't land that job because that company last year has gone through significant layoffs to the quote unquote restructuring for AI and whatnot. And I am completely honest, I don't think that I'm passionate enough about software engineering and computer science to have survived that. In some of my other videos, I talk about the Gen Z mindset, which is setting boundaries and prioritizing your freedom and independence over anything. And I think that I do have that mindset. At the end of the day, I am Gen Z. I'm not going to use that as the reasoning for why I have that mindset. But I think that as I've gotten older, I have moved a little bit away from the grind culture and more towards the being happy and feeling fulfilled. And so I find myself constantly thinking whatever universal entity is looking after me for not giving me that job. Because I know for a fact that if I was at that company to this day, I would be 10 times as stressed and probably 10 times as sad and dissociated and hateful of my life. So, where did I go from here? Like I said, I've spent a few months following the interview rejection to really just sit down with myself, take things chill, and just kind of just let my mind reset. And I think that progressed into a period of enlightenment and soul searching. The second half of 2025 and into 2026 was and has been a huge year for me in terms of self discovery. What I really mean by this is that I started shifting my focus away from that grind culture and more towards establishing what my purpose in life was. I started seeing my friends more. I started forcing myself to go out despite being tired, despite feeling numb. And one of the big things that I started trying to tackle was inner fear. I was kicking myself a lot as I got older for all the missed opportunities that I had in my late teens or into my early 20s because I was too afraid to do something. This year was when I really started forcing myself to just do it anyways. For example, I was never a car person growing up. I'm still not a huge car person, but I always felt the urge to want to learn how to do basic maintenance myself. My dad never taught me. It's not like it wasn't his expertise, and I can't blame him for that. But I just never found myself willing to do it because I didn't want to mess something up, make an expensive mistake, and I didn't want to be embarrassed that I messed something up. So what did I do? I just never did it. I avoided it. So I went to Harbor Freight. I went to AutoZone. I pulled up Google. I pulled up Gemini. I pulled up ChatGPT, and I started learning how to do this stuff. And I had successfully changed brakes in my car, in my girlfriend's car. I had learned how to do oil changes. I learned how to do all the basic maintenance that I wish I had learned years earlier. And at the end of it all, I kept telling myself that was not so bad. I could have done that 7 years ago, but I'd wasted all this time just being afraid of doing something. Some other stuff were YouTube, right? I'm starting to make these YouTube videos, experimenting with my style of video, what kind of audience I want to target, what I want to talk about. And I'm targeting a lot of weaknesses that I always wanted to tackle, such as learning how to speak more coherently or not caring what people think and just speaking my mind, right? Whether or not I get an audience for this, whether or not anyone sees this, I think that I have really just forced myself out of my comfort zone. And at the end of the day, if I don't get anything out of this, if I am not able to build the community that I want, I still have a digital journal for the future for when I'm 10 years or 20, 30 years older than I am right now to look back at myself and really pat myself on the back for taking that kind of risk. And YouTube's interesting because it's not even something that I'm completely new to. I had a YouTube channel when I was young, different from this current one, that actually ended up being pretty successful for the time. I think this was like 2011, and all I did was make stupid videos where I would unbox items or build Lego minifigures or just play music or with Rubik's Cubes. And some of those videos ended up getting close to like 50,000 views, which at the time for a kid, that's pretty damn good. Some of the other hobbies that I just started trying out were videography and just traveling more when I get the chance. Videography was something that I really enjoyed in high school. I did classes like video editing and TV production, and then I kind of abandoned it when I went to college. I mainly focused on my studies and that grind that I was talking about. But now that I have a little bit more financial cushion and more time, and that I'm getting older, of course, I kind of went back to that hobby and I've been really enjoying it. And then just traveling, right? Either on my own, using the vacation time that I do have, or taking advantage of business trips. So these are just a few of the examples of really me just trying to find out what I want out of this life, searching for that fulfillment that my occupation alone was not giving me. And I will say that even though I'm pretty early into the process, I'd say at this point, only like 8 months into it, probably 6 months, this has been making a huge difference on my mental health. Seeing my friends, seeing my family, traveling, just doing shit that I want to do has really just, the best way to describe it is just like the rain clouds have just kind of moved away from over my head. I remember I had a buddy from college, and him and I used to always have these deep talks, just talking about our perspectives on life, what the future holds. And there was one quote that he said that has stuck with me throughout all these years. He was telling me a story about one of our other buddies. We'll call him John. And he was having a conversation with John, and John was saying to him, he was just like, "Man, I just don't think I'm passionate about anything. I just don't think that there's anything in life that I truly care about that I can be passionate about and just pursue." And then my buddy looked at John and said, "Well, the reason that you're not passionate about anything is because you don't do anything." And when my friend told me that, that stuck with me throughout all the years because I think it's true. Passion and fulfillment are not things that just fly in through the window. They're not things that are just handed to you, or they're not things that you just develop at some random age. Those are things that you actually have to search for. You have to try stuff, fail a couple times, right? And you have to keep pushing. You have to force yourself out of the comfort zone. And so I really took those words to heart this year, and I really started to just build my life outside of my occupation. Now, for all the young adults and late teens that are still in school and very early career like I am, there's nothing wrong with prioritizing your career. I will say that outright. I still prioritize my career. As I mentioned before, I hold it very high on a pedestal. But that doesn't mean that it needs to be the only thing that you hold that high on your pedestal. You still have a life, and time is a valuable asset to you. Youth is one thing that you're never going to get back, and there's a lot of things that you can't do when you're older. And so take advantage of that. Don't save your life for later because you don't even know if there's going to be later. Obviously, there's limits to that. You need to be smart because if there is a later, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot by not planning for that. So check all your boxes. Obviously, do your Roth IRA, save your emergency fund, all the good stuff, right? Don't go blow 50K this weekend on a Rolex. But that being said, you can still enjoy your life now. Enjoy the present and plan for the future. Learn from the past. I think that this period of life that I've started to discover has been very peaceful for me. And I think back to something that actually happened really recently. I was having lunch at work and I was sitting outside because now the weather's getting a little bit better. And I literally feel like I felt my frontal lobe develop at that moment. I was sitting outside on a little like stone, just, eating my lunch, enjoying the sunlight. And for some reason, I felt this like bittersweet feeling in my head, even though nothing particularly happened. It almost felt like I wanted to shed a tear, but not out of sadness. It was like a feeling of relief somehow. And I think what it was I just felt like I had figured it out. I had found the direction that I was looking for the last couple of years. Even though I don't think I know exactly what to do and when to do it, I don't have a formalized 100% blueprint for the key to life. But I think I finally found a direction. It felt like I've closed a chapter of my life and opened a new one. The grind culture, the all gas, no breaks into my career chapter has ended. And I have started to begin a chapter of life where career is still high up there, but I start to do things for me for the first time in my life. Not for my parents, not for my career, for me.